love and fury, love and anger, love and rejection. The contrast is stark in our readings today between St. Paul's famous love passage and our gospel today, which is a continuation of last Sunday's gospel, where Jesus reveals himself, proclaims who he is, and yet reveals also now a hard message. The prophet is not accepted in his own native place. And so we see the people reject love itself, or love himself, in the person of Jesus Christ. And how does this take place? How is, as St. Francis used to say, go around saying, love is not loved. Love is not loved. Why is love not loved? Well, we find that Jesus is rejected both in his message and as the messenger. They reject him because of who he is and where he's from, but he's also rejected because of the message that he comes to bring. It says, in fact, in the Catechism in 177, that to believe has a twofold reference, to the person and to the truth. To the truth by trust in the person who bears witness to it. So the relationship between love and truth, love and the person, faith and belief in the person, all intertwines in the person of Jesus Christ. Now Jesus preaches a hard truth, a stinging truth that the people did not want to hear, that so often they had rejected the ways of God and so had not received the prophet's messages in the history of salvation. And they also would reject the message of Jesus for the same reason. So we too face the fact that we must accept Christ both in his message and as the messenger. And that includes the truth that Jesus comes to speak to us. We hear in that love passage from St. Paul today the fact that love does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. And this is certainly a hard message to hear, particularly in our culture which is in so many ways alienated from the truth, or even a claim about objective truth, or truth that applies to all, moral truth that applies to everyone. Many people don't want to hear about that truth today. It's one thing that's always dangerous, to talk about the claim about truth. And that passage from St. Paul is so striking because he speaks about the fact that we're not to rejoice over wrongdoing. And we've seen in our culture this movement from initially a claim that certain wrongs should be tolerated to then moving to, once they were tolerated, having to accept and even rejoice in these falsities. You see it happen with gay marriage. It was first said that we had to accept it as an act of tolerance, but now so many are being pushed to say it must be rejoiced in, celebrated. You must be an ally, particularly if you work at a major corporation. You'll be under great pressure to say that you believe in gay marriage and the gay pride movement. Likewise, we see with transgenderism, now that we have to affirm the fact that a man can become a woman, or can really be a woman, even though he's quite clearly a biological man. We've seen that push very seriously with entertainers, with government figures, with athletes, that they're being said that we have to accept that these are, in fact, women in many cases when they are, in fact, biological men. And even to the point where we're being told that biological men should be allowed to, even those biological men who have, in fact, molested and raped women in their past, be put in women's prisons because they now claim to be women. What a horrific and tragic thing that we know will turn out to be. for those women in those prisons. Likewise, with abortion, at one time, the mantra was that it was meant to be safe, legal, and rare. In other words, we should simply tolerate it. But what happened now, of course, is that it's meant to be celebrated according to our culture. The New York legislature cheered when they passed abortion legislation not too long ago. And this campaign developed called Shout Your Abortion, to rejoice in the wrongdoing. Now, two personal stories that have touched me recently. One is the fact that show those who are courageous enough to stand up for the truth, even in the midst of such great cultural pressure. One was Father Mike Schmidt speaking at the March for Life. I watched the video of it online after it happened. He spoke about his own grandmother, who in 1973 was a nurse in a hospital, who had started performing abortions. And when she refused to participate in those abortions, she was, in fact, fired from her job. And yet she stood for the truth. And Father Mike talked about in that clip how it affected his family to become so dedicated to the cause of life. Likewise, a recent story I heard about a high school student, not one in serving in this particular parish area where I am now, but in a different part of the Pittsburgh area. But he had a high school civics class where the teacher came in and wrote on a chalkboard pro-life, pro-choice, and asked each student to come and put their name under one of those two categories. The student, who is a parishioner at a Catholic parish, went up and was the very first one to put his name beside the pro-life argument, and was also the last one to put his name under the pro-life argument, which led to him facing much accusation and vitriol directed at him for the rest of this class period, including from the teacher, that he was all alone in standing up for speaking about being pro-life at that time. And yet his father was very proud of him, because he said, well, Dad, I didn't make any friends today, when he told the story, but yet he stood up for what he knew the truth to be about being pro-life. All this points to the fact that love and truth, again, must be always come together. And this was beautifully laid out by St. John Paul II in many ways and occasions. But I recently came across, reading the book Witness to Hope, about his life, a retreat that he gave in 1954 to college students when he was a priest, working with college students. And it speaks about some 5 themes from this retreat, and it was so on point with speaking about love and truth and how they interact. The first one was that we cannot fragment life or reduce truth to a secondary issue. He said that the method of the kingdom of God is the method of truth. Because of this, man must be prepared to agree with reality in all its totality. He went on to say that Christianity is not an abstraction, but a call to action. That the kingdom of God is to be proclaimed by Christ not merely in theory, but as a call to action. And then he spoke about the messenger as Jesus Christ as that great messenger in the third point. That Jesus Christ, as the incarnation of God, entered fully into the drama of the human condition. So Jesus enters into our struggle, our sinfulness, denial of the truth. The fourth point was that love is not fulfilling oneself to the use of another, but love is in fact giving oneself to another for the good of the other, and then receiving the other person as a gift, which we know was a great theme throughout his pontificate later on when he became the Pope as well. And the fifth and final theme mentioned in this book was that the lethal paradox of the age, not only that age, but continuing certainly in our age, is that for all its alleged humanism, it had ended up devaluing the human person into an economic unit, an ideological category, or an expression of a class or race or ethnicity, reducing the person and what they truly were as someone capable of loving and being loved, in other words. And so this all points to the fact that we are called to be people of love, and that love means accepting the truth of Jesus Christ, both his message and himself as the messenger, as the one who comes from the Father to reveal life and love to us. And this, of course, also fits in with what I've been talking about over recent weeks and speaking about the 5 love languages and the different aspects of how we can enter into a deeper, loving relationship with others. This week, I want to talk about acts of service. It's important that we enter into great acts of service, to be a gift to another by that concrete action that St. John Paul II talked about. That we're called to see these acts not out of a sense of burdensomeness or out of a sense of having to do something to take care of another as something difficult, but in fact, to see it as an act of love, as an act of service. You know, it's like a couple I recently heard about, someone was speaking about a young couple and their young marriage and the fact that they were, talking about socks. And, he was messy, the husband was messy, leaving socks around the house. The wife, of course, was someone more organized, as those opposites often attract. And this was a cause of a bit of a dispute, right? Nothing major, but still something that they had to work through. And so, of course, the woman serves in the fact that if she sees it, she's willing to pick up the sock, but the man serves by looking and saying, well, I need to start picking up my socks after myself since I don't live alone anymore. So each of them can use that little simple example as a way to serve one another in a deeper way. And this can have profound effects on love. Another man talking about his marriage said he wasn't very handy around the house fixing things, which his wife, kind of upset her in certain ways because her father was always very handy and she kind of liked to have someone that was handy around the house. Well, he said he found out that by changing a light bulb, something as simple as that was something that really spoke her love language and really encouraged her and encouraged their relationship. So something as simple as that, even without being the best of fixing things, was an act of service that spoke his wife's love language and really added to their relationship with one another. So think of those ways that we can serve one another, both in marriage but in other situations as well. Maybe we can do an act of service but also attach a note to it saying, how much we appreciate the person and how much we want to do something small that we can show our appreciation in return. And so all this points to the fact that love and fury, love and anger, love and rejection are, yes, a part of the human story that we all experience. And yet when we accept Jesus in his message as well as himself as the messenger, the one who comes from God, we start to experience truth and love together. We can begin to live the truth in love as Jesus calls us to do. This will lead us to loving acts of service for one another, and this will lead us to truly prepare the way for the coming of the kingdom of God.